So, Crusader, why don't you put up Linda's pictures while I do the introduction?
So here, can you see this one?
No. You want me to put it up? Oh, there it's. There we go.
Ooh,
Yes,
nice.
that's it.
Oh, that's nice.
Wow.
What is it?
Well, that's my greenhouse.
Oh, wow.
And it will be used perhaps for a greenhouse sometimes, but for right now, as the season is shifting, it will be used as my outdoor office during
Wow.
this pandemic and any future pandemics.
It's wonderful.
But
Oh,
it's
I love it.
Yeah, but it's officially a greenhouse, which means that if I do want to, move plants in when I learn how to do that kind of thing, I can. And one of the original designs was to have a little pergola in the driveway. And I think that's put off a year or two because we've been busy. And this will solve the problem in the meantime. It also allows for privacy. It's a little bit like, do you remember the cone of silence from Get Out?
Yes.
So, people aren't identifiable. Some of you know that I see patients in the yard now. And so you can't really identify faces from the inside, and the entrance is sort of sneakily around the back. The second picture will show where it sits in the yard. It doesn't really take over much. It is plastic, and I acknowledge that that's not perhaps ideal, but it is a greenhouse officially.
Did you order it online?
Yeah, it was like $230. This was not breaking the bank. I mean,
Yeah.
compared to the rest. And I was afraid to put up in about an hour. I'll let you know, but so far pretty sturdy. I'm happy to recommend it. And the lights they all turn off with one plug. One of the things I learned from Preseta was, permanent lighting disrupts the natural cycles in the yard, and that I don't mean permission, but like whatever, blessing to have lights on when I want to use it for such, but to allow the natural, moonlighting otherwise. And so with one plug, everything turns off. So I'm feeling kind of consistent, honoring the, and then there's a second picture, which can show you the yard up to date.
Yeah, and there's the
You see it way on the left.
greenhouse.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind
Wow.
of like an igloo, actually.
Yeah.
But I don't think it takes over, and I think it's back in that holly corner, and I'm sure it'll draw some attention in the neighborhood, but so did all of this, and maybe that's good.
That's the area that had like the little secret passageway in.
Exactly.
Right?
Now the secret
Yeah.
passageway goes in right to the entrance of the little igloo.
Yeah.
So it's very secretive, and
Yeah.
right there is the entrance. You can't really see it from the street at all. So all the sight lines. I mean, as I've been trying to figure out how to do everything, I've seen some patients up on the hill, which is nice, but it's so close to the street that there's just a little bit of self-conscious. And so I'm thinking, as we've said many times, we kind of backed into this. So this wasn't originally the plan. It may evolve into something else as the trees and such near there get bigger. It might have privacy on its own. But going into the cold season, it's significantly warmer in there. It's got vents at the top. And so I think it's good enough for COVID outdoor. And pop by and see it. It's kind of cute. I was happy.
The amazing thing to me is how much stuff is shoved into that yard and there's still room to put more stuff. I mean,
Right.
it's 60 by 60 and there's like, this is an amazing amount of stuff in there.
It's the design. Take a bow, Priscilla. It's the design. No, it's really,
Wasn't going there, but yes.
but increasingly there are like little cubby places that something could happen that needs to happen. And it's as if it was waiting for that spot. So you can see at the front in the middle, kind of, the bottom of this picture, my pollinators they're like 4 inches or maybe even 5 or 6. Very excited.
Say why that's exciting. People wouldn't, it's not that you planted them last week. It's
Oh, I know. Twice mowed down. But some other really fun things, just giving you an update on the yard. You can see the colors are changing in the really tall tree on the right. And that's just been a delight because the colorful leaves are falling and I have all this new appreciation for leaf litter. Who even know the word before? I'm learning about just the evolution of the plants through the seasons. I don't know a lot about it, but when I walk out outside of my yard, I see some of the same changes that I see in my yard, and it makes me feel less like they're diseased or bothered and more like they're just doing their thing. So it's kind of fun to see it move through some seasons. We'll layer in things over the years. I've got a couple of interesting little tidbits. One of the raised beds has grass. I don't know if most of you know that story. When we did the sod, I saved the extra sod that they were going to just leave or toss because I was sure not all of it would grow, and all of it grew beautifully. So I saved this bed of grass to fill in where I need to. I've got some spots I could, but that's not a long term, but it works as ground cover. And then the one up front that's still just soil, I tried some peas and I was going to have them string up to the sort of out of date basketball hoop, and not one sprouted. So I have to, reconfigure and plant again, but that's why that one doesn't have any. But to the left, the strawberries are still coming up wild. I mean, they're not wild strawberries, but they're still coming up. I bet there's 15 in there right now. Started in May. To the right, the lettuce is just taking over. The kale, not so much. And we've got squash and fennel and peppers, and we'll see what happens over the years. Anyway, it's a lovely update to give you.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Linda. So why don't we get started with our presentation? So we are Grow Local for the Planet, and this is our September episode. We are a organization that is continually growing and learning and bringing our different expertise to the table and having great conversations and learning from each other. And so what we've been talking about recently is what is it that we're all trying to accomplish?
Is it just me, or is the slide entire slide not showing?
Not
on the-
showing. Thank you,
Yes,
not showing.
we haven't started yet, Ivan.
Oh, okay.
It
Thank you.
just says conceptual framework on mine. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so we're learning at this point. We're beginning to really understand the central core of what it means to us to try to restore the ecology in the suburbs. And that is where we are going to start with Preseda, and then how all these parts that we are interested in composting and the soil and all of that, how it hangs off of this central core. So why don't we start with Preseda, and she'll talk about that.
Fred, just before we do that, I just want to alert you that we do have our worm specialist,
Oh, great.
and that, you know, wherever that belongs in, we could kindly put it near the front so she doesn't have to hang, or she might choose to hang. But but we're all set for that too.
Okay, yeah, so maybe I'll do a little preview. Preseda is going to talk about that, and then we'll start talking about some of the components that are supporting that that central core, which I'll start talking a few minutes about ground cover, and then Preseda will go back to mulching, and then Carol will do a talk on composting, different parts of composting, and then we'll do the vericomposting. And after that, Linda will do the complement to what Preseda is going to introduce now, but from the perspective of human health and nutrient dense food. And then we'll finish off with a bionutrient meter, which will support what Linda will be talking about. And after that, we'll open things up for discussion.
Good.
Preseda, are you ready?
I am. So when we were talking about this, we were kind of thinking about what is our core conceptual framework. And I think the thing that best sums it up is this quote from von Humboldt, that nature is not a collection of species, but a web of interconnected, interacting species. And we have talked about this in terms of native plants, because those are all the different species, the plant part of all the species. And we have talked also about the microorganisms, the microbiome. We've talked about it in the soil, we've talked about it in the compost, we've talked about it in humans. So my brief for tonight was kind of to remind us of that, and that the microbiome rules. And I was given 3 minutes to do that, which seemed like plenty, right? So I started looking around deeper and across in breadth. And there's a lot of really interesting data on supporting the idea of the incredible importance of the microbiome. There are some studies at the ecosystem level. They started with observation, and the observation was that if you did genetic analysis of the microbiome among various organisms, plants, mammals, and salamanders, for example, in an ecosystem, they had some profound commonalities, more than if you compared, say, salamanders across two different ecosystems. And the experiment was to give researchers a bunch of organisms from different ecosystems and ask them if they could predict which ecosystem they came from on the basis of their microbiome genetics. And they could. Had a very high success rate at placing organisms back in their ecosystems. So that seems pretty strong, pretty tight, pretty impressive. Certainly made me think, oh, well, you know, there's this thing happening in an ecosystem and they're all sharing, all the creatures are sharing the microbiome. Isn't that amazing and isn't that wonderful? We also have a bunch of data within a species. We do know, and Linda will talk about this for humans, more diverse microbiome with the right species and the right ratios. The individuals within a species tend to be healthier. They are more resilient to environmental change, meaning changes in temperature, particularly, but not only. They're more resistant to different pathogens. They're more resistant to parasites. And they're more productive. If they're plants, they grow bigger. I don't know for other species if we know that they grow bigger, and they tend to live longer. And the examples are as diverse as coral and aphids and humans. And in the collection of organism thing, it turns out that forests recover faster from forest fires if they have a very diverse microbiome. Again, it all seems consistent. I was very happy. It's great to see patterns in nature. But then you keep reading, and of course, you find there might be more to it. So the more to it was really interesting, that there's a whole bunch of species that have very few microorganisms. Their microbiome is very limited, like one or a few species, and in fact, low numbers of those species. And you dig around further, and it turns out that bats and birds, as far as we know, based on what we've looked at so far, it's true for them. And the creative thinking about why that might be true has included that they can't afford to carry the weight of a lot of microorganisms because they tend to be super aerodynamic and as light as possible in every way possible. They can't carry the weight, or that they move around between migration and even within their foraging ranges. They move around too much to have been selected to specialize in a few microorganisms, that they might take on facultatively whatever is in the environment where they are. So birds can migrate thousands of miles and go from the temperate to the tropic to the Arctic, and maybe it doesn't make sense to have the same microorganisms. In insects, butterflies and dragonflies also seem to have few or no microorganisms in their gut. They fly. Does the same reasoning apply to them? Somebody also suggested that in invertebrates, maybe their gut is too short to actually house microorganisms, that they get passed through, they have no place they can attach to. But then it turns out, but there are ant species that have very rich, dense clouds of microorganisms, and there are other species that have one or just a few microorganisms. So where does that leave us? Well, that's interesting. It seems to me that the field is just, are you waving to me, Fred?
Yes. Do you have slides with this?
I've been showing slides all along. You haven't seen them?
No.
I guess,
Oh,
sorry. We've been following your words, though.
There.
okay.
Okay. That's
I
the
see them
start.
now. Thank you for waving. Next time, wave faster. So now I can't change them. Okay, so this is the pro within an ecosystem. I put more words on the slide than I usually do because I wanted to make it more accessible to people if they download it on the web. So here is within a species, the benefits: odd, corals, aphids, forests. And then here are the exceptions, and why are there exceptions? So I was talking about that within a taxonomic group, namely within ants, there are both extremes, very few and very dense, lots of them. So net, I think we don't know enough yet to really have the patterns and the understanding of who has what kind of microbiome and why. But we do know a couple of things. We do know that suburban soil is dirt, by which I mean it has no microbiome. It has nothing in it, basically. And we do know that with the richer microbiome of the right species, mammals particularly, and humans above all, are healthier both physically and emotionally. For example, less prone to depression, much lower rates of obesity, much lower rates of several diseases. Linda will talk about that, I'm sure. And that plants are healthier, they themselves, and they are more nutritious for herbivores that eat them. And they are included in the healthier as more resilient to pathogens and environmental change. So I can't remember where I stopped. Yeah, so that's where I stopped. I think I made it in 3 minutes. So the net is, yes, it's a good framework, but it doesn't explain everything. It is particularly relevant to what we're trying to do. Even within what we're trying to do, there are some species that have very low number of species in their microbiome, like the ants. So we'll find out more about that. Oh, thank you, Linda. You sent me a text. So that's where we are on the microbiome.
Great. Thanks, Priscilla. Can you stop share?
Yes.
Because then I will. So, so to sort of recap some of what you just said, Priscilla, the diversity is important because we are part of that diversity. And the microbiome is the basis of that diversity. And the more diverse the microbiome is, the healthier our environment is and the healthier we are. And so this leads into, hopefully I can get this. Cover crops. So we are learning that we're coming up into the fall and into the winter and spring when, especially with vegetables, and a lot of our plants are going to be dormant and the ground is going to be exposed. That has a detrimental effect to the microbiome in the soil. So we're learning that it's very important to keep the soil covered. Priscilla, in a couple of minutes, we'll talk about mulching, but another way of keeping soil covered is through cover crops. And here's a list of the different reasons for using cover crops. But in terms of the microbiome, it protects the soil from the heat of the sun, direct heat of the sun, protects the soil from rain, heavy rain, which compacts the soil without any cover over it, and erosion and things like that. And it also, and at the same time, some cover crops will return nutrients to the soil. So here's different reasons. And here are different types of cover crops that you can use both for in your garden growing food and around your perennials and shrubs and woody plants. And it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Some of these cover crops are annuals and some are biannuals and some are perennials. And some you will like to plant in the spring as early as possible because they like the warmer temperatures and they will continue growing into the summer. And some of them, like these grains and grasses, they like the colder temperatures. And so you will plant them starting in late July and August, and like the winter rye, you can plant into November. And they will, even though they don't grow as quickly in the winter, they'll still be covering the ground and they'll sprout up again in the spring. And once you're ready to plant again, you either mow them or flatten them with a roller, and then they become another source of mulch. And like the clovers and other legumes, they suck nitrogen out of the air and store it in the soil. And it's another way of feeding the soil, and you don't have to buy artificial nitrogen. So that's a real quick introduction to cover crops. We can have a conversation if you're interested in more details about it. But moving along, I think Cressida is going to talk more about the mulching end of keeping the ground covered.
So let me try to get screen sharing going again.
Okay.
So. Yes?
Yep.
So when we were figuring out how to divide this up, we thought that Fred was the person to talk about what you needed in your beds, and I would talk about what you need outside of your beds, under your shrubs and trees. And most of the deciduous, certainly the deciduous trees and shrubs, will drop a lot of leaf litter, which is really useful for enriching the soil. And it's also useful, or even more useful, for as habitat, as nesting sites and overwintering sites for a lot of small species, small vertebrates, as well as all kinds of insects. And you should, I know this is hard to convince people, you should really not rake. You should leave as much as you can, certainly under your shrubs. Don't clean up under your shrubs. It doesn't offend anybody aesthetically. It's not going to kill any grass because there's no grass there anyway, but it's going to be really important for lots of insects and for lots of small creatures. Some of them, like some of the small mammals, run around under the snow, and the mulch and leaf litter gives them a nice insulation from the snow and helps them maintain oxygen and the stuff that they need through the winter. So if you can, in your beds, leave the dead perennials and the annuals. They become better over the winter, and in the spring is the worst time to rake them off. What you should do is try to dig them into the soil. The one exception that I would make to Fred's comment about covering the soil is that I've been learning a lot about bees, is that bees need some open soil, and they, in particular, if you want to make a bee nest where they can overwinter, keep a little open soil, meaning with no plants growing on the top of it, and they like it quite well drained. So if your soil is not very well drained, mix in some sand, and you will have a solitary bee species nesting there, which is pretty great. The further thing, hang on, one more slide. Where am I? Why is it not? Do they see that slide, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So in particular, I want to remind you, we were talking about all these butterflies and their caterpillars. Many eggs are laid in the trees, but most of them have fallen into the ground, and they're going to develop underground. So you want to leave the litter, and if you have soft soil, leave soft soil so that they can burrow in during the season and will overwinter down there. And don't use bark mulch if you can avoid it. It's very hard. It's very drying. It tends to be full of dyes and other chemicals. And the wood is usually not native, so it will introduce chemicals that are not part of our ecosystem at all. If you need mulch, if you don't have enough leaves, if you need to put something down, you can buy a leaf mulch, which is not my favorite, but it's certainly way better than bark mulch. It's also kind of expensive, but you can find that around.
So Priscilla, I have a question about that. So going to the transfer station and getting that
Compost.
wood mulch that they've chopped up, that's not a good idea?
Where would you want to put it?
I just planted a few things and I put mulched around the things I planted,
Why don't you put down compost?
just plain old compost.
I would.
Like, okay, yeah, I could do that.
Or maybe do you have leaves from your trees?
I have a ton of leaves. I actually
Yeah.
do have, I have a whole corner of my yard that's where I put a lot of the leaves. So I have a lot.
I would use those.
Okay, those are better.
Definitely better.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Sure. And that's it.
Okay. Next up is compost. And I believe Carol has something to tell us about that.
Thank you, Linda.
Sorry.
So
I could have told you sooner,
anyways,
but I was reading all these interesting things with the pictures.
So you've seen this before, but John Liu is one of the most influential soil scientists. And it's cool because he started out as a reporter, so he's a very good presence and he's great at explaining things without being, then he dove in and learned a ton about, became a soil scientist. So it's an awesome blend. So he basically came to the conclusion the most meaningful indicator for the health of the land and the long-term wealth of a nation is whether soil is being formed or lost. And they definitely have, they keep emphasizing and learning more and more about how important compost is with forming, reforming soil. And I'm just going to briefly mention this slide that Linda will go into more detail. But one of the things, so a Regenerative Impact Investing Conference, it's very exciting to see how much they're waking up to understanding what is going on. So the fact that they brought it down into different levels as far as how we understand the basics as far as healthy food versus junk food and free from, and then nutrient density is also good, but now they're really diving into level 4, soil microbiome and gut microbiome. So Linda will go into detail on that. And here's a reminder of also like General Mills and even Cargill and even Nestle. They have woken up to the fact that compost, cycling back what you have on your farm to compost to help and all, mulch and everything is to partner with nature and nurture it. So it's very exciting. Definitely I prefer the smaller more local places. That's the best way, but at least they're going to be reducing the massive amounts of chemicals and in general making improvements instead of the big fight they've given us for way too many years. This is actually Paul Hawkins. You might have recognized this book because it's very similar to the book that came out in 2017, Project Drawdown, where there was 100 different ways to draw down carbon. Well, Paul Hawkins reviewed it all and he's like, wait a minute, regeneration is the best way to do it. And so his book just came out on September 22nd. So I've been diving into that and it's been very exciting. And this is at one of the big projects that I'm working on. It's, I think I might have mentioned it, 50 feet of compostable materials that I'm helping them figure out. And I tried, there was this, a page on compost in this book that I'm like so psyched for, because it's on its way to become a bestseller. So pardon me for so much detail here. I tried to even make it into not just copy the whole page, but it's incredible. No matter how soil life is nurtured and enriched, the principle of feeding the soil is the core of agriculture and the bedrock of regeneration. When soil is not fed, the outcome is similar to what happens when humans are not nourished. Disease. Disease in plants is experienced as sickly crops, poor yield, and infestation. Sir Albert Halvard called disease a clue to be pursued, not an insect or organism to be poisoned. Could spreading a thin layer of organic compost across the planet's vast grasslands address the climate crisis? According to scientists at University of California at Berkeley, if you use half of an inch layer of compost were applied to only 5% of California's nearly 60 million acres, it could offset the greenhouse gas emissions produced by the state's agriculture and forestry sector for 1 year. So this is really going to help advance compost. And I really, really hope that people learn
I'm
enough
sorry,
about
Carol,
proper-
could you elaborate on that? I don't see the connection between compost and the gas emissions.
The
Maybe
key thing
it's
is the Project Drawdown that Paul Hawkins was involved with. They discovered 100 different ways to draw down carbon, to reduce the amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere already. Besides, because of course
I
we
see.
need
So
to.
you get better growth and that I see. Got you. Thank you.
Right, because it's carbon's not the enemy. It's just been out of cycle for years. We've just been emitting so much of it, including the way we've been doing landscaping. We've been doing landscape as dirt as a substrate versus soil as a living organism that helps to pull down the proper, pull down and actually use the carbon for all the microbiomes. Liquid, it's photosynthesis basically is the liquid carbon pathway down into the soil to be used by so many different organisms.
Can I ask a question? Can you talk just a little bit more about what compost is and different types that we're talking about here?
I will be getting into that.
Oh, thank you.
But I just wanted to share some excitement as far as so they discovered the compost significantly increased plant growth, improved the water holding capacity of soil, and boosted sequestration of atmospheric carbon underground. The problem over the years is the compost's positive outcomes. It's not easily measured, so it's actually also exciting to have more large corporations involved, and hoping that they could provide more data that will. But I'm very much tracking it to help make sure it's going in the right direction. And then also this indicates what reiterates what Linda's going to be talking about. And right in the book, it says beings are now identified as superorganisms because our gut microbiome contains twice as many organisms as our somatic human cells. And you guys probably remember me showing how we understand it with the probiotics with the body, but we didn't really fully understand how we had 6 soils, and compost is basically a prebiotic for the soil. And just as pre and probiotics feed and improve gut health, compost does the same for soil. Compost represents an opportunity for nearly everyone to connect to a climate solution they can get their hands on. I love that. So this is what I started with and it's a huge random pile of leaves and grass clippings. And I've helped tons of different friends and family, and they, you know, I've just seen how I totally understand where they get their assumptions from. So I'm trying to help on that. That you remember so you went to compost. There's a zillion, we reviewed this as far as the flow chart. Can you compost at home? Yes. And where? Do you want it outside? And all you need to and actually Linda and I are working on this as far as with her land being so different, what she's going to have to put into potential compost, you know, will be different in regards to volume, but we're also there's compost enhancers like the Pfeiffer compost starter that I'm testing a whole bunch of different things at this retreat center, and I'm also going to be testing bokashi. I apologize.
Actually, I just noticed something that caught my interest. If you don't mind going back one slide.
Sure.
So when you just compost leaves, you end up with leaf mold. Is that good or bad?
It has to be managed because I'm doing deep dive with leaves. There's there's a huge difference when they're fresh leaves or when they're like this. And the other key thing is the different types of leaves. Like they suggest leaves like oak leaves, you should do less than 25% because their lignin content is, it just basically they're very difficult to break down. And that they highly, I mean, even Rodale highly recommends when you compost to mulch the leaves. They definitely, Healthy Yards does a good job saying, please, this is actually Healthy Yards. So leave the leaves, definitely, but if it's on, if you're concerned for your long grass, you can either go over the leaves with your mower, because they will, sorry, it's just that the last 2 weeks I've been doing a real deep dive into these piles, and the fact that there's so much matted leaves in the midst of the piles that aren't turning into compost because no one was managing this for the last 2 years. And so we're trying to set it up so that the new leaves and grass clippings that'll be coming in soon will be managed correctly at the beginning.
Does managed correctly mean that you turn it? Does it mean that you layer leaves versus grass? What do you mean by manage it?
You need to make sure that these are the basics. You need to make sure that you have a combination of brown and green. But the interesting thing is grass, when it becomes dry, very dry, it actually is a brown material. And leaves actually have a higher nitrogen content because this is also, brown also means carbon and nitrogen. So a lot of times you'll see, more often you'll see carbon and nitrogen ratios. So it's really important to understand when the grass becomes actually a brown, then you have to really increase the amount of food scraps you put in, because now your grass, and as far as air and water, you need to make sure are in there. And those piles, there are pockets that there's just air or there's just too much water. So I have this compost aerator. We have pitchforks, then we're trying to, flip the piles, but there's also these aerators where it's literally a stick that you stick in, and it's, I don't know if I have it here. I was gonna say, so I'll give you some, for instance, what I started doing. We started to mix together, and we added a chicken wire that we piled up a lot more, and we put food scraps in, and it's been very excited. I tried to get a video of how in this chicken wire, because we're able to make it so high and we're putting so much food scraps in it and mixing, we're managing this so well that the temperature is getting between 120 and 140, which is the hot composting, which makes it compost much quicker. So you can actually use it. And whereas the other piles, we're lucky to get in the steady range of 80 to 90. This is, and it was interesting because the manager, land manager, who's a lot more mechanical, he mentioned to my friend that he thinks it looks beautiful. And I'm like, okay. But let me explain what we're doing. But see, I mean, we already have, while moving around the piles, in the midst of this, I find matted leaves, and then right next to it, I'll find gorgeous compost. So it's just been fascinating and overwhelming, as you can tell from my voice. And here's a real clincher in regards to, I came across a bucket of, these are fresh grass clippings, and these are grass clippings from a month ago.
Wow.
And they're drastically different. And when you look into the piles, even within the piles, they're at totally different stages, depending upon a whole slew of different things. And so what I'm doing here also is I highly recommend to also increase the combination, increase the quality, but also speed up, is to use finished compost. So Mahoney's has a really high-end compost that has the mycorrhizal fungi. So I've been mixing that in, and we've been definitely getting quicker compost.
What's the name of that compost, Carol?
I don't have it handy. I thought I had. Do I have the bag there now?
And is it organic? Do you always buy organic?
Oh yeah, it's definitely organic, and also it's made from local materials too. So I think that combination is key. Different resources. Like I've noted, they say banana peels, they break down quickly, or banana skins decompose rapidly, but my experience is they really don't. But they do mention cover them quickly with organic matter to avoid attracting flies, because that's the other thing, is definitely need to cover the kitchen straps. And what I've been doing a lot lately is I cut up the banana skins, and I also I mix in a bunch of different fruit, like cantaloupe rinds and strawberry, pieces of strawberry, and I mix it up with coffee grounds, and I mix water in. So I help for the dry areas to get the nitrogen mix that they really need. And also I keep hearing about seaweed, and we all live pretty close to the shore. So I really want to track down seaweed. Supposedly that is a really good thing to add. I've heard so many people will, weeds can be composted. It's like, it can be, but careful to ensure that's hot composting. Trying to think. Sorry about this. Like I said. Oh, the other key thing, I've been chopping up eggshells. At the compost that I did at the church, I was able to do it properly, and we got some gorgeous compost. But the one thing that I noticed was the darn eggshells had not been decomposing at all. They were still remain the same. But I definitely chop those up. I either let them dry and crumble them, or like I said, I'm really getting excited about the potential of the blending. I think I'm going to buy a second blender.
And you put a straw in it and sip and forget the whole compost step.
Say what?
You don't just put a straw in your cantaloupe coffee grinds and sip it and just skip the compost.
Yeah, or that'd be fun, wouldn't it?
Hey, Carol, how much
yep.
more do you have? Because we won't have time for discussion.
Well, I was going to say, why don't we, let me skip down to, I found an indoor bokashi living, like literally like yesterday, and I'm going to be purchasing it and giving it a try. It says you can make it so that you can actually add it to a regular compost pile. So here's a composting, the time frame. This is really important. It could take 30 days or 2 years. Over the next 3 weeks, I'm really trying every process that I've heard about to speed up the composting, because even it's almost finished, but you can use almost finished compost in the fall, and by spring it's going to be finished in the ground, and it's going to make the soil healthier. And then in the spring you really should have finished compost for your growing. So how about I go back to this slide and hand it over to Linda.
I think we might have Debbie Kohler next for worms.
Oh, okay.
In fact, if you all remember that the algorithm for whether you want to go indoors or out, one of the questions, was if you go inside, how do you feel about worms? And the next word is ick. So can that be an introduction to Debbie Kohler?
Yeah, I was gonna say, so I'm gonna I love seeing the worms outside. So I'm gonna try bokashi, but she loves worms, and she'll do the worm bin.
Right.
All right. Hi, everybody.
So I didn't, go ahead. You can introduce yourself if you want a little bit.
Okay, we'll start there. And I usually have my worm bin inside, but I happen to have it outside to take pictures because the pictures work much better outside. So first of all, hi, I'm Linda's sister-in-law. So she was so lucky to marry my brother, or my brother was so lucky to marry her.
One or the other.
One or the other. And I don't do PowerPoints because this is after hours. So you're not going to see PowerPoint. There's no organization in how I put together my pictures. So we'll just look at the pictures and talk. I started worm composting. I was thinking it was 13 years ago, but I did the math and it was 17 years ago. And this is the first worm bin I ever had. My kids were in 3rd grade. My twins were in 3rd grade, and they did composting at school, and they asked me to freeze a bag of food scraps so they could bring it into school. And then at the end of the year, the teacher didn't want the bin anymore and said, who wants to take it home? And my kids came home and begged me to take the worm bin home. And I thought, ugh, why do I want to do this? But they really wanted to do it. They'll take care of it. You know, it's just like a dog. Not that I had a dog. They said they'd take care of it. And in 6 months, they were done with the worm bin. And 17 years later, here I am with my worm bin. So I don't know if I can. All right, so I'll just move pictures as I get there. So this is the worm bin. There's stuff there, and I just threw in a bunch of scraps there. So somebody said cantaloupe and bananas. It depends what season it is. Sometimes I'll put an entire rind of watermelon in there. I put anything in there, but one of the things you should have is a book.
Did you change the photo, or are we still looking at the same
They still
photo?
have the bin with the white.
Oh, yeah, I guess I got to change every time I want to. It won't just, let me see if it'll just share my screen. Can you see a different picture now?
Yeah, we got banana peels.
Banana peels, yeah. So that's actually in my basement. So that's actually usually where I have it. So I just took a bunch of pictures that I'll show. Now that's worm bedding, which I don't normally use, but in the last thing I bought, they just sent it to me. So you'll figure out what works. That's a close-up of all our great food. And you're going to read, this is a book. If you're going to do worm composting, I have 3 of them because every time you get something, but it's called Worms Eat My Garbage. And this is the 35th edition. And I think I have like 2 other editions somewhere upstairs. It's great. You have to have a book. You have to have some guidance, but everything you read is going to be not necessarily what works for you. And you're just going to try it. Like I gave the worms potato peels, raw potato peels. And like 2 weeks later, I went down there. I was like, oh my God, they didn't eat them. They smelled, they were terrible. But if you read all these books, they say, oh, potato peels and broccoli and all that. I couldn't put some of that stuff in. So you kind of learn what works. You have to have peat moss. So somebody said you got to cover the fruits and vegetables so that you don't get bugs. I get bugs too. I'll show you them soon. They're coming. You also have to have topsoil. It's real cheap, $4 for topsoil, just to keep it covered. There's the bugs. So it's good to have fly paper around if you're inside. They're teeny tiny bugs, but they're just annoying. But if you have these things up, it collects most of the bugs, and it's not a big deal. I mean, I know a lot of people would be turned off by this. For the first 5 years, I didn't have any. And I was talking to somebody because I had to go replace some parts for my compost bin. And I went to a Ace Hardware store. And the lady looked at me like I was out of my mind what I was asking for. I was looking for some drain things and plumbing. And the lady said, we don't have that here. And I said, oh, well, it's for my worm bin. And right away she says, oh, talk to this guy over here. He loves composting. And this guy, he was so excited to help me. And he got me almost exactly what I wanted. But yet the woman in the store had no idea or no clue. He said there's just so many more bugs now. He said you almost can't prevent it. Now I put my worm bin outside for a little bit, just in the nice weather. But you got to be careful. They can't get too hot or too cold. So right now it's been fine.
I'm sorry, can you explain this? I'm not sure what we're looking at. So these are bugs that come in because of your as a side effect of your composting, or is it something good?
Nope, you were exactly right. As a side effect of the compost. I don't want you to think it's all glory having a worm bin,
It almost looks like a tornado. Is that sticky paper they're sticking to?
Sticky fly paper.
Okay.
Yep. Just fly paper.
Wow.
And it's, you don't have that many. I mean, that's been there for a while. They collect over it. They don't ever come upstairs. They like the compost and they stick to the fly paper. This is the drain so that it aerates out of and again, this is 17 years old. I just kind of clean it every now and then. It's not a great picture. And this is the cover. This is a vent on the top of the worm bin. And I went online the other day because you can see this is all cracked and I can't take it out anymore. And I went online and I looked for a 3-inch vent and I got four new ones for like $11. So that'll last me another 34 years. I'll be good. Now this is my worm bin. It has a hole and a tube that goes through it, right? Hole in the tube. You saw what it looked like at the top. This is that picture with the vent is, what goes on the surface there. And I love this worm bin. It's like a recycling container that has these 2 vents. This goes to the other side and the water drains out here. So if too much water is in there, it drains out. They have all these other worm composting bins where you stack the one on another. And my husband got that because this was getting old about 10 years ago. And I used this and it just didn't work for me. Way too many bugs. They wouldn't eat the food in order. They didn't eat it the way I wanted them to eat it. So then it just was much more difficult for me to manage. And so I went back to my worm bin and I was much happier. And that's our regular compost. So when the worms can't eat the food, I throw it in here. And this is nice to just roll around. So I don't have that out in the yard, one that you guys were showing before. And then I put my compost in here and my husband throws it in the garden. And there's some cute little worms. I know you wanted pictures of worms.
Yeah.
So there's, when you turn the food, there's hundreds or thousands of them. It's amazing how many worms are in the bin. And that's my little pitchfork that I turn everything in and whatever. And they eat lots of paper. So I have pictures of paper. They're juicy worms if you want to go fishing with them.
They look amazing. You mentioned smell in the beginning. Is that a deterrent?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
It's hardly any smell, which is amazing. Sometimes if you leave it for, you go on vacation for a week and a half, you come back, maybe at the bottom of some of it, if they didn't like it, it might smell a little bit, but you turn it and it's all gone. The smell never bothered me.
Mm.
But you should cover it up. Don't leave the food exposed. And I don't go through a ton of paper, but I go through a lot of shredded paper. I don't use the newspaper. I use sort of my white business paper. I just shred it up and instead of throwing it away, I give it to the worms and they eat it and it's all gone. And I throw it in the compost and it's gone. It's just unbelievable. And that's where I've gotten most of my worms is Uncle Jim's Worm Farm. I hardly ever had to order them. I didn't order anything for about 15 years. And then I went on a vacation and it was for 10 or 12 days and nobody took care of the worms, which usually I don't get a worm babysitter, I admit it. And the drain clogged and then all the water sat in there and I'd given them a lot of food before I left just to make sure. And when I came home, it was a mess. I had to throw everything away and start over again. So it takes a while to get going because they double in 90 days. And if you start with 100 or 200, that's really not many. Like, start with 500. I hate to say it. Don't start with less than 500. And that's it.
Wow.
Great.
So I had that. And then let's see, the only other thing I wanted to tell you when you're talking about what's compostable and what people tell you, I told Linda this story, but I'm in food service. And so I was at a place that had compostable cups because, our clients all want us to use compostable paper and they don't want you to use styrofoam anymore and all kinds of things. And sometimes they don't know, what sounds good isn't always what's good. Anyway, they're using these compostable cups and they feel just like plastic cups. I'm sure you've had them in stores. And so I thought, wow, cool, compostable cups. So I took the compostable cup, I broke it in half. I came home, I threw one in the worm bin, half of it in the worm bin and half of it in the compost. and I wanted to see what would happen. And nothing happened. And then I was at a training, and of course the people who were pushing the compostable cups were there. And I said to them, I said, well, so how long will it take for the compostable cup to break down? And of course I asked this in front of like 150 people. And they said, well, what, you know, what do you mean? You know, like they didn't want to really answer. And then I said, then I finally admitted to them, well, I put some in my worm bin and some in my compost, and they're all still there and fully intact 6 months later. And they said, oh, well, you have to do commercial composting for it to break down. So I was like, well, what's commercial composting? And of course, they couldn't really answer my question. I never got an answer out of that. At that point, I'd kind of put them on the spot and embarrassed them enough. I left it alone. But so, you know, I don't know what commercial composting is, but when they use, you know, they must put chemicals or something in it to break it down.
Yeah, actually, I've done a deep dive in all this. So Black Earth Compost, I've actually been to their site. Their piles are so incredibly high that the internal temperatures are able to manage it. In fact, I'm so happy you just mentioned this, because I'm adding that to my list of the piles I've been able to get so high in temperature. I'm going to test my compostable cups to see if I can get it to break down. But the key thing they say is to make sure, because the thermometer, I love it, is big whoop. You might get to 120, 140 for like a day or two. It has to be consistent. So I noticed it going down to 100, and I started panicking. But then I had to, you know, I just, you know, managed it more. But yeah, it's sad how I mean, I've been studying it for 6 years, and I really have to look at every product when I'm at an event as to whether or not something should go in the compost bin or not. Even, I mean, there's coated plates that are they have petroleum lining on. They look like paper plates, but they have this obnoxious petroleum plastic lining on it, which makes it so that the food doesn't soak into it.
Right.
Well, report back to us about those compostable cups, right? We're all scientists at heart here.
Yep.
So help me understand this. I don't understand the concept of not replenishing the worms, because I'm assuming that after a certain time you take all of that stuff and you put it in your garden. So I would imagine you need to replenish the worms every now and then.
No, I never need to replenish them unless I mess up or they die. And I've only had to do that twice in 17 years, where I went away too long and they just didn't drain properly and they died. I've
How do
never
you
had to.
separate the compost stuff that they've created from them?
Exactly.
Yeah, you put the
So their entire life cycle, Ivan, their entire life cycle takes place in that bin. So they reproduce, they have baby worms, the worms eat, they're fed off, they eat the food scraps, they eat the stuff that is given to them, and they create castings which make beautiful fertilizer for the garden.
But the point, I think, is that you can't ask them to move to the left so that all the casings you can take out.
Thank you.
That's not true. So
You can tell them to move to left. Only yours answer your command.
So
Put the food on the left.
If you listen to the books, right, they tell you just start feeding them on one side.
Exactly.
And then everything on the left-hand side, they don't want to be there because they've eaten everything. There's nothing there. I don't do that because that just seems too hard for me. When I go in there, you turn the lights on, you'll have a ton of worms on the top. And then you take the lid off and they all crawl down. And then I just scrape the top. So I might not feed them for 4 or 5 days. I scrape the top and then I just take out a lot of stuff. Once in a while, a worm goes into it. I don't care. You lose a couple of worms. If the worms go in the garden, it's fine. The very first time I did it with my kids, we followed the rules. If you read the book, what the book says is you take everything out with your hands and you remove the worms and you and honestly, it took us like 3 hours. And I said, I'm not doing this. Like, they're worms. I don't care if some worms go in the garden. So now I just take out a bucket every month or two. I take out a bucket of compost, give it to my husband, throw it in the garden, whatever.
Was going to say the amount of earthworms I find in the compost piles is awesome, and it's directly related to the quality of the compost that I see as to how many earthworms I see.
Yeah, now earthworms don't like worm composting, from what I understand. They don't like when you turn them. They don't like when you play with them. Like the red wigglers, they just go away. If you go to play with them, they go down, they get out of your way. The other ones, I mean, if you think about it, think about all the worms you see on the road after a rainy day, right? They come up from the ground and they go wandering about and they all die in the middle of the road. My understanding is earthworms aren't going to do a worm bin justice.
All right, yeah.
Wigglers?
Red wigglers, yeah.
Oh, so those were not earthworms that we were looking at earlier. Those
No.
were, I see. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, so we have a whole other section. I don't think we're going to get to this, but it's something I'm really excited about. So it's going to get returned back in October. I think we'll continue this conversation if there's anything else that anybody wants to talk about that was brought up earlier in the evening. I also see that there are several questions in the chat about composting. I think asking Deb about that we can get to.
Sounds good.
So let's see, is this is this Virginia?
Yes,
VM? Oh, would you like to ask your question?
I did in the chat.
Yeah.
Do you want me to
Yes,
just repeat
please.
it? Oh, I wanted to know if there was a way to keep the worms outside during the winter or maybe in a cold basement without killing them.
Yeah. So I talked to this guy. My basement's very cold. So it's very cold in the winter, no question about it. In the summer, it's definitely cool. It's very comfortable down there in the summer. You can leave them outside most of the year. They can't freeze, and obviously they can't be overheated. So you just have to use good judgment. Don't keep them in the sun. But almost everything you read, you can do that. Now, the guy I spoke to the other day, he told me he lived in Michigan and he used to keep it outside 9 months out of the year, 8 months out of the year. You just got to be careful. Now, my concern was I have vents on the top. And so if you have vents on the top and it rains, the water's going to go in there. So you're going to have to be careful about the humidity, I think. I don't have that problem when I leave it in the house.
How long can you go without feeding them, say if you went away on vacation?
I mean, I've done it a week easily. Like I said, I have a very old bin, and so my drain spouts need poking a little bit, and that's where I got in trouble. But that was really 10 or 12 days I was away and I didn't feed them and they drowned.
I'm sorry, what do you need the drain spouts for? Do you add water?
I don't ever water them, but if you're like, I'll give them a watermelon. So if I want to just feed them a lot, I'll just throw in a whole watermelon rind. I'll cut up an entire watermelon, put all the rind in, and that creates a lot of, you get your worm tea from the worms. So the worms create liquid worm tea. But then if you put in very liquidy, if you give them bananas all the time, then it's not so bad. But if you put in juicy fruit or something, you just got to be careful. So the drain prevents them from getting too wet. So you kind of need a drain. And again, there's so many different compost bins out there. I just have a very old-fashioned one, but I'm attached to it because it works for me.
May I add something here? There, you can buy tiered earthworm farms with different size mesh so that the castings fall through, so you don't have to train your worms to go to one side or the other. They sort naturally. You don't have to touch anything. You end up with perfect size stuff, and you can just take that away. It's a very nice way to do it, and it also tends to minimize the moisture buildup because you have a lot more surface area that can give you ventilation and drying. And those are really nice to have in the basement because all of the problems that you get from the large cubic volume that you've got in your system, Deb, are much lower issue if you have things spread out in different tiers. So for a starter, you might have to pay more, but it solves some of these problems. It makes the whole thing a little more robust because you're not running it all just in one block.
And that's what I have. It's sitting on that. I just couldn't get it to work for me. And maybe it was because I was so used to that big bin.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Those green things that it was sitting on are the ones that Mike got you said, and you didn't like them.
It was 4-tiered, and I'd put the food down, but I had to cover it up on each layer or I got bugs. And I found that I was putting more dirt in just to cover the food up. And then the worms would go to, they could fit through the holes. And it, I probably wasn't patient enough because people love those bins. They really do. I'm not opposed to them. I just couldn't get it to work for me.
So how much stuff do you get from it? Were you saying like one pail every month or something?
Maybe every 2 months. Depends how much I'm feeding them. But it's not as much as you think. I mean, I bet I put in easily 5 pounds a week. And you would think I would get 5 pounds a month. And I probably get 5 pounds every 2 months, it seems. I mean, I've never weighed it. I've never measured it. That's very unscientific. So for those scientific folks out there, but that's what it feels like. It feels like I go down with a large bowl of food, almost, 4 times a week. I don't get half that back.
It's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that with the church one. Is how it kept shrinking.
Yeah. It's amazing.
I was going to say, people were asking questions on the compost. So this is what it looks like. That's the compost mix from Mahoney's. And then this is the aerator. So these sides fold up. And then when you put the stick in, it's great exercise. But you stick it down and you pull it up and you get to see what's going on in the middle of the pile. And it's a way to mix it up without having to flip it over to a different pile.
So I had a question for you, Carol. So aside from observing the color, which you said, oh, it's nice and black. How do you gauge when you have good compost?
When it has an earthy smell. But it also, we're going to need to screen out a number because they definitely had twigs. And like I said, it's been amazing what matted pile of leaves easily crumbles up and which ones are like, okay, forget it, they're stuck. So, and when you can mix that into the soil and it blends right in. It's been fascinating. Like I said, it's when it has an earthy smell.
But Carol, what you just spoke about is exactly how we do it at home with chicken wire and grass, and Sheila does it, and it's amazing. We've just reiterated our entire process there, so it's fantastic to look at that. Yeah, it's a science. So, thank you.
Sure. Saying. Here's Linda and I watched the video last night. The last half of it. It's just so, isn't it so encouraging how much the investment world is following this?
It's every element of this. Yes.
I'm sorry, which video is this?
Do you see the level? So the Regenerative Impact Investing Conference that I attended via Zoom in June is called Rooted in Health.
Rooted in
And
Health.
so the 4 levels of bringing back nutritional wisdom, and they say that we're finally on level 4, which is the most important.
And preview of coming attractions, level 3, about differentiating the nutrient density. Fred and I will feature next time, huh, Fred?
Yeah, it's very interesting what Preseda said at the beginning and what Linda's going to talk about. It's the same thing.
Exactly
It's
the
just-
same thing. Yep.
It's just how healthy is the soil microbiome, is how healthy our gut microbiome, is how healthy we are as people. It's how healthy the environment is. They're all connected.
Yep.
So it's just about 8:30. If people want to keep discussing, or this is a point where we can stop. If people have other questions.
I actually had a question for Preseda because, I mean, this is the time of the year when you start worrying about all the leaves that fall.
I think
And,
she
you know,
left.
Oh, she left, yeah.
But you can ask it.
We can pretend to, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so, I mean, you know, and I try and, you know, get rid of it frequently. Sort of the message that's coming through is that, you know, you need that layer, you know, on your ground, on the ground. So a question I sort of had was, you know, what is that fine line? Do I rake in the first few months or first few weeks when there's tons of leaves falling down, and, you know, later in the season just let those leaves? Is there a mechanism? Is there a method to the madness? How does one? Because I have a lot of trees in the backyard, and you know, it's a constant problem. So
Do you know if any of them are oak?
Sorry.
A lot of them are.
A lot of them are oak.
Okay, so be careful in regards to how many of those you add to your compost.
But you know, Ivan,
Yes.
so I'm thinking in the bigger picture. You know, when a farmland goes dormant, and it doesn't get developed, it's just nothing happens to it, and you just let the land do what it wants to do over a long period of time, it's slowly, over years, it transforms into a forest. It's like the forest is the most complex ecological system for the planet, for our region. And the way it regenerates itself is through the leaves falling to this forest floor, and it builds the humus, and it feeds the microbiome. So it just seems like that regeneration, if we can continue doing that for ourselves in our, you know, in our suburban yards, if there's some way that we can do that in a balanced way, that, you know, with our neighbors and, you know, yeah, living here, if there's some way that we can continue that process, that's how we're restoring our ecological environment.
Look, I was excited. Healthy Yards is pretty decent. It says, leave the leaves as they fall in the perennial beds under tree canopies and around the shrubs. But otherwise, be careful because the matted leaves on your grass could kill the grass. But if you mulch the leaves, then you could, they could fall into the soil so that it's not killing the grass. And then again, you could also at the next stage, shred some of them and add it to your compost pile.
Yeah, so we need to talk to Preseda about it. It's like, at what point do the bugs need those leaves to to reproduce themselves? If the leaves fall earlier in the season and the bugs aren't doing that, can we shred those leaves then? Because if we're shredding them later in the season, we're shredding the bugs at the same time.
Well, they say you're supposed to, in the spring, you're supposed to wait till, I think, like 7 or 8 days of a temperature over 50 degrees, because that means that most likely the insects have left.
Yeah.
And they also suggest that if you do any pruning, that you don't get rid of the pruning, you set it aside in a section to make sure that any insects that are in the branches that assume are dead and not pretty, they're able to gently leave before you do anything to them.
Right. And so at what point in the fall can you do that? So that's a question we should investigate.
Yeah, the spring comment Carol just made makes a lot of sense, and I'll take that quite seriously. So wait till the temperature gets above 50 degrees before cleaning up the lawn. But the question about the fall will be something, Fred, would be really nice to get some feedback on.
Yeah.
If you have shrubs that don't have leaves falling, or you don't have a lot of trees with leaves falling, do you go to Ivan's house and ask him for his leaves? I still
Well,
have
that's the
some
thing.
ground
It's like,
cover.
if he has too many oak, then maybe you can share them.
Well,
People who don't have them.
But I could put oak, even if it's not going to go into the compost. Could that be under bushes where I don't have leaves? Because I don't have, I mean, I still have some open soil that I don't want to have turned to dirt. Oak could go there, just not so much in the compost, right? Or at least only 20%.
Yeah. I think it's how diverse it is. If it's, if it's 100% oak, then I don't think that's very healthy for the soil. But if you mix it up.
Yeah. Ivan, how is your compost in terms of like location in the yard and smell and neighbors or ease?
Sheila, do you want to comment?
It's off to the side and it doesn't really stink, but I tend to put, I layer it with drier stuff.
Yeah, so the way Carol described her process is exactly the way Sheila does it. So we have it on the side.
Yeah.
She spreads grass.
Well, not so much grass, because grass gets stinky, but I'll spread like dried stuff, like some dried leaves, mixed leaves.
Mixed leaves.
You have the tulip trees and maples and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I come and see sometime?
Oh, absolutely.
Sure.
Yes.
I might just copy you guys.
Yeah, and actually, Linda, without exaggeration, it is amazing compost. It really is. And
Yeah,
that
is it?
question, it is really amazing compost. It's rich black,
Yeah.
and it's rich. The worms are just flourishing there, right?
Like it.
But you don't even measure the temperature,
No,
right?
but I don't put meat or greasy things in there.
Yeah, but exactly what Carol said. No meat and no, I forget, dairy.
No, none of that stuff. Put that in the transfer station stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems kind of fun maybe to do the temperature thing, because
Yeah.
I might like that just to make the whole thing more interesting.
Right.
I mean, I can tell it gets warm because it steams in the winter. but-
Yeah, that's so cool.
Steams in the winter. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I love that.
Yeah.
You can get a really good long probe temperature thermometer at like Home Goods for $10. It's a barbecue thermometer. Otherwise, they're like $20-$30 if you go to a garden place.
Okay. Cool, thank you. I think that would be kind of fun. I mean, I think sometimes data collection just kind of keeps me engaged. Another thing happening in the yard. Demetra said she would come by and add some mycorrhizal kind of food, a safe, whatever, good kind. I don't have the picture with me right now, but it happened to be the same exact one, Fred, I showed you that Preseda recommended. Oh, there we go. And I'm going to see if I can do some comparing of the ones that got fed different ways. And then I can report back.
Did you see the posting that Shukong put on Facebook? Apparently, the mycorrhiza formed this really interesting symbiotic relationship with roots of trees and shrubs. And they provide moisture to the trees and shrubs and then take food from the trees itself. And then he put this interesting overtone to it where the organisms called saprophytes or heterotrophs that take advantage of this mutual symbiotic relationship and steal all the food from the mycorrhiza. So it's really fascinating.
Where is this? Where did Shukong put it?
He put it on Facebook, a posting on Facebook just a couple of days ago.
Which
There's
Facebook?
also a documentary on, I believe it's Amazon Prime, that talks about the mycorrhizae, and it's actually a communication system between trees, just like they have conversations in a way.
Oh wow! Do you know what the name of that?
I don't recall it offhand. If I come across it, I'll post it for the next meeting.
In Search of the Mother Tree. It's a best-selling by Suzanne Simard.
Suzanne Simmers, yeah.
And she definitely, and she's been studying this for 30 years. And she said she's just been taken seriously for the last 3 to 5 years. They thought she was a quack, but they really fully understand that, but she's been right all along.
I love that.
It's a fascinating book and well worth the read.
That's Amy Adams, the actress, discovered it, and she wants to direct it and play Suzanne in it within the next 2 years.
Ooh, terrific.
Yeah.
I thought the book wasn't out, so the book is out.
Yeah,
yes, it is. You can get it on Amazon.
Oh,
or actually,
You can also get it from the library.
Yep.
Okay.
There's another movie that I can recommend. Maybe some of you have seen it, and maybe preview of coming attractions. Fantastic Fungi.
Fungi. Just Yukong posted that as well, and we're going to watch it this weekend.
I watched it. It was amazing, and I think we're gonna, Margot, maybe you're gonna talk about some mushrooms sometime soon. I don't know if Margot's available, but I think we might do a little bit on mushrooms at some point.
I hope so.
Yeah, I think she's growing some. I might try to. They're coming up spontaneously in the yard. It's wild, and then they disappear again. Like they're just so alive.
Okay, well, 8:40.
Good.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Very informative. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Deb.
Yep, thanks, bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Good luck.
I have to show this.
Yeah,
Suzanne
right?
Simard.
Wow. Look at that.
Wow.
And that's
They're so clueless about what's going on this planet.
Yeah, Finding the Mother Tree, she did a TED Talk too.
yeah.
Right.
I saw her
Yeah.
speak in person like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
She's awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, good night.
Good night.
Okay.